Okay, continuing with Ecclesiastes, because it's interesting how when you start looking at this as one big long thought, it's a 12 chapter thought. And many of these were in the past when we dealt with certain passages where his thoughts, the author's thoughts, going through. Here we have one big long thought. Many of also the Pauline letters are written this way. This is sometimes when we dissect them and we don't know what we're looking at. You know, sometimes when we dissect the Bible, it's like taking out a part of a body of something that you don't know what it is and going, I don't know what this is. Let me do a bunch of guesswork about it. Well, put it back into the whole thing. Some people don't read the whole book as a thought. I've sat in churches where they were confused in chapter 4, but it's clear that the thought was back in chapter 2. And so the writer was referring something back in chapter 2. So unless you're really well versed in how the thought processes of the author is, you could come up with a lot of wrong ideas. Same thing is true of Ecclesiastes when we look at it. And a very important thing we're looking at here in chapter 3. This one is very, you see this on posters and stuff, and it's very esoteric again. To everything, there's a season, there's a time and every purpose, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck, a time to kill, a time to be healed. There's a time for everything. Everything has its purpose under heaven is what it's going through. A time to embrace, a time to get, a time to loose. One thing we don't deal with is the changing of times and wins and losses. Sometimes even we Christians tend to think that life needs to be like this, when actually it's going to be like this. This is the pattern that the preacher is telling us, is that you have to look at this as a time to hate and a time to love and a time for war and a time for peace. So you have all these different times. What profits a man hath he that worketh in thereof? I've seen the travail which God hath given to those men to be exercised in it, because it is a form of travail. You know, you think you're moving forward and you fall backwards, and then all of a sudden you have a blessing, and all of a sudden things go your way, and then all of a sudden things don't. He that hath made everything beautiful in his time has also set the world in their heart, that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. What he's saying is that we are a small part of a larger pattern, and we can't see, even though we study the Bible to get a better understanding, we still only have what God has told us about the long haul, the beginning to the end, of creation to destruction. And we're in this very, very small part, and we're trying to understand the snippets of what we've been given to try and understand the whole. And so that's what he's saying here, that it is beautiful, though, what God is doing, although many times we only see the parts of it and see the travail and the loss and the oppression and all these things. And God is working them out. It's almost as if I see a pattern here. God chooses good, but then man chooses bad, then God chooses good. So if you want to see this almost heartbeat of life, we should be following God and things will get better, but we can't help that the choices of man and of men in general will come and make their effect on our lives. But the whole thing is beautiful because God's going to stop that travail. Again, it's almost like giving birth, if you will, and we see that mentioned several times in the scripture. He's going to stop that travail. So I know that there is no good in them, that for a man to rejoice and to do good in his life. He's again talking about that. And also that every man should eat and drink. He mentions that again. It is a gift of God. I know that whatever God doth, it shall be done forever. Nothing can be put onto it, neither can anything be taken from it. Now, this can be taken out of the context, again, to say that, well, God chooses everything. No, he works everything out, and you'll find that also, working things out. He can turn around the lemonade, the lemons, and making them into the lemonade. He can take the negative, and turn it into a positive. But we're the ones that say, well, God created the negative to turn it into the positive. No, man chose the negative. That's what sin is. But God is so powerful that he can take the sin and turn that around to a positive by forgiving the sinner and moving on. I saw under the sun the place of judgment, that wickedness was there and righteousness, but iniquity was there. So he saw them both. There wasn't pure judgment and there wasn't pure righteousness. Iniquity was there. He wasn't talking about Christ's righteousness. He's talking about our own. This is one of the reasons why God gives us his. I saw in my heart that God will judge the righteous and the wicked, and there is a time in every person. I said in my heart concerning the estate of the sons of man, that God might manifest to them and that they might see that they themselves are beasts. In many senses, we are just beasts. We're respirating, we're eating, drinking, reproducing, and then dying. So he's talking about that we need to see ourselves. And this isn't the evolutionary men are just animals. This isn't evolution. We need to see that these bodies are very beast-like in that sense. For what befalleth the sons of men befalleth the beast. That's the point he's making. As one dies, so the other. All go to one place, the dust. And he goes, who knows that the spirit of man that goes upward and the spirit of beast will go down? Therefore I perceive there's nothing better, he goes reiterating, that a man should rejoice in his own works, that is his portion, for who shall bring him to see what shall come after him? So, you travailing over not having what you have, it's redundancy, it's vanity. And I returned and considered all the oppressions that were done under the sun, and behold, the tears of such that were oppressed, and there was no comforter. And I saw the oppressors that had power, but there was no comforter. And he goes into very esoteric thinking here early, very abstract in the fact that he's talking about how it's better to have never seen this than to have seen it. And that's a very high philosophical argument to say it's better to have not been here than to have seen the travail and the oppression and the pain that has been happening here. And that's the point he's making. He's not saying life is useless. Life is redundant. Life has no purpose. He's saying in a certain sense, because of the oppression and the pain, it would have been better not to have seen it. So he's going for that there. And I considered all the travail and every white work that every man envied in his neighbor. This was also vexation and vanity. The fool folds his hands together and eats his own flesh. Better is a handful with quietness than both hands full with travail. And again, the struggle of life. He saw this. No matter what he could do, he couldn't alleviate the struggles that came from life. Money will not alleviate that. Hypersexuality, hyper religiosity. None of these will help man escape to the veil of life. And we see only that Christ is the one who can do that and can help us through the travails of life. Not just by lemons to lemonade kind of things, but see us. Maybe we don't know why something happens, but we don't have to know why. We just know who is with us. The why of something happened isn't important of the who of the connection. So he talks about this. Better is a handful in quietness. And he talks about one being alone and how hard that is. Two are better than one. He even talks about a three chord where people could bind together to be strong and stronger. Better is poor and a wise child than an old and foolish king who will no more be admonished. If you've got a king that cannot be called down, that is better to have a wise child running over you than a foolish man who cannot be admonished. And keep thy foot when thou goest to the house of God, and be ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools. The idea of watch your foot, watch your step, watch your ways. In the Bible, the hands and feet are symbol of what you do and where you go. Watch your foot when you leave the house of God, and be ready to hear. Be ready to learn. Be ready to give an account, but to learn. It's better than giving the sacrifice of fools. Don't be rash with your mouth, and let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before God. He talks a lot about vows here. And we Christians are horrible, just horrible with our mouths of making vows before God. I'll do this, I'll do that. If you'll do this, I'll do that. Oh, please do this, do that, do this, and I'll do that. And then he even talks about that. Suffer not thy mouth to cause thy flesh to sin. Neither say thou before the angel that it was an error. Neither before God to be angry at your voice and destroy the works of thy hands. The idea that when you make a vow and then you turn around to the angels and say, well, I was just kidding, it was an error. Don't make those kind of vows. You don't get to get out of them. When a man makes a vow unto God, defer not to pay it, for God has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you vowed. There's a very seriousness. Again, I'm not trying to make this too sexist, but men used to be known as men of our word. Men of our word. You're a man of your word. If you're going to say something, you do it. That comes right straight from here. A lot of men were very quiet because they understood the power of their words. Kings were very quiet. They understood the power of their word. When we saw in Esther, when Ahasuerus left the room, better focus yourself. What happens next will happen. And you need to focus and control yourself so that you might move correctly. So he talks about this in 5. And so many times we just make vows and do vows, and we're very foolish with our mouth. For in a multitude of dreams and many words there are also vanities. But fear the Lord. If you fear the Lord, you won't be speaking vanities or stuff in vain. Oh, if you'll do this, I'll go to the mission field. If you'll do this, I'll become a pastor. Oh, if this happens, well, then that might have been going the way anyway. It might have been God's will for that to come about anyway, but now you put this vow on it. It's better not to have any vows. And then people that don't keep them. How dishonorable is that? Wherefore, wherefore the profit of the earth is for all. To king himself is served by the field. That this king is even served by the field. The king isn't a greater man than me because he has power, because he's still served by the field. He still has to eat. He still has to drink. You know. So he's still like me. He that loveth the silver shall not be satisfied with silver, and he that loveth abundance with increase, this is also vanity. I've seen this in lifestyle choices where people have a lot of what they want, and it's just vanity. You can't get enough. People that are hypersexual just cannot get enough sex. People that want money cannot get enough money. People that want power. I always wonder why we have people in our government who are in their 80s still chasing the power. How come you're not with your grandkids? How come you're not enjoying life? Go see the world, but instead they lock themselves in rooms fighting for power. How sad. And so he talks about here. So again, we see as this big thought process is going on, now we're getting a little more of the nuts and bolts of what you can do if you have the proper perspective of life, that is to enjoy the work of your hands. Don't get lost in these other things. The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eat little or much, but the abundance of the rich shall not suffer him to sleep. People that have a lot worry a lot. They can't sleep. Someone might steal their stuff. People that have a little sleep like babies. There is a sore evil which I have seen under the sun, namely riches, kept for the owners, therefore to their hurt. People that have been hurt by their own riches. People that have been entombed and incarcerated in their mind because of their own riches. But whose riches perish by evil travail, and he that begetteth a son, he has nothing to give him. Evil travail, a bad time might come to take your riches, whether it's a thief or whether it's an economic downturn or whether something happens, a flood, a fire, whatever, it takes your riches. Well, what do you have to give your son then? What do you have to give your family then? It says a sore evil. All the days he eateth in darkness, and he hath gathered sorrow. Behold, I have seen that it is good and comely for one to eat and drink. He says that again. This is like the third time he says this. To eat and drink. That is his portion. Every man to whom God hath given riches and wealth, and hath given him power to eat thereof, and to take his portion, and to rejoice in his labor, this is a gift of God. Again, telling you, you may not be rich, you may not be a king, but can you feed yourself? Can you take care of yourself? Can you glorify God that you have your needs met? There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and is common unto men, a man to whom God hath given riches, wealth, and honor. He wanted nothing, yet God giveth him no power to eat thereof. Again, he keeps pounding this down. You would think we're taught and almost bored into our head that being rich is better. Being rich is better. We see driving the big cars and having the big penthouses and having all these women around you and all this stuff and the accolades of people, that's better, but it's chasing a fantasy. That's what he's talking about. He's seen this, that these people cannot even enjoy their life because of they're chasing after their riches. If a man beget 100 children and live many lives, so that the days of his years are many, and his soul is not filled. Even if a man had eternal life down here or lived 1,000 years, he would have a very woeful existence, because being caught up in the riches and to protect the riches and maintain the riches, over time everyone's going to go into the dumpster for a while and then pull up and then go. It's just the economic cycles. Everybody faces loss in their life. And that's what travail is loss and climbing back up. That's travail. We hate doing it. But it's a part of our lot as human beings in this world, to travail, to pull ourselves back up. So he talks about that. All the labor of his is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not filled. He's never filled with what he's got. For what hath a wise man more than a fool? What hath the poor that knoweth to walk before the living? Better in the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire. This is vanity. The sight of your eyes, what you see, what you have, what you possess, what you're working with is better than the desire of what's he call it here? The desire of vanities. Than the wandering of desire is what he has. What desire is a wandering thing. You can't really, it's away from your hands. You can't grasp it, so you wander after it. You know, you're like someone chasing a hallucination. I see, I'm trying to grasp it. I see, and I'm trying to grasp, and you never attain it. It'd be better to attain what you can see. Pick up what you can see. Don't just chase after a false desire. For what, for that which is been is named already, and that which is known, that it is a man, neither may he contend with him that is mightier than he. Well, what you have, you have. You can't really contend with someone mightier than you to get that fictitious desire. Just go ahead and stick with yourself. For who knows what is for man in this life, all the days of his vain life, which he spendeth in the shadow? For who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun? Again, the idea of this dovetailing into this pulling down of the idea. So we see in this thought, again, reiterating the same points, showing the vainness and the shallowness of many perspectives of this life and showing them clearly so we may know the elusiveness of riches. I love where he said there, where I'm going back to this up here. He talked about the wandering of desire. That would be a key. That's also known as the lust of the flesh. You cannot get enough. I want more. So we see this in here, and now we're halfway through, and we have 6 more to go, but we're seeing where he's taking this thought. We're still right in the middle of one big thought. We've encapsulated a few high points, and we're seeing the pros and the cons. We're seeing travail and triumph and victory. Be ready for things to go south sometimes. Be ready to face a downturn. The good thing is that with this knowledge comes the wisdom of the Almighty. When my life travails, he can be there. When my life is good, he can be there also. He deserves to be there on my good days and bad. But let's recognize this more abstract viewpoint of life, this perspective, and it's going to help us as we're trying to make our daily decisions to glorify God. But again, this book has its place. We're not just to follow the 10 Commandments and make sure they do all these rotes, but having a stronger esoteric understanding of why you're doing what you're doing and the pratfalls of not doing that correctly. You could do Judaism correctly and still have a lot of problems in here. This is what Jesus saw when he got here, is they had flipped the script, and now the powerful were ignoring the powerless, and now the chasing after those wanderings, those desires, and it was not good. And this is not the world God wants us to live in, but to be careful and mindful of our lives and thankful.